"Son, I have to tell you something," Agnes said to Ethan. "Mom, I love to hear the details, but I need to go and meet Irene right now," Ethan said, getting up to leave. "It's been ages. I miss her." "That's exactly what I need to talk to you about," Agnes said. Ethan's expressions suddenly changed. The smile of excitement he had a few seconds ago wholly vanished. "What do you mean? Did something happen to her?" "Please sit down," Agnes insisted, knowing her son needed to be seated for this news. Ethan didn't argue and did as he was told. "What happened, Ma? Please say something," Ethan urged. He saw the concern on his mother's face and knew something was wrong. "Irene left you for another man," she exclaimed after trying so hard to say it more nicely but failed. "What do you mean?" Ethan's mind could not comprehend what his mother had said. He had already suffered too much for his age. He wasn't ready for a blow like this. "Sweetie, she is dating Mr. Smith's son, the heir to the oil company. She even sent her engagement ring back. I put it up in your room," Agnes explained, trying to hold back her tears after seeing her son's reaction. She knew very well how much he loved her. This news was bound to break his heart, so she waited for him to return so that she could tell it to him in person. Ethan, who was in the military, had been serving in Afghanistan and had just returned after a year. While there, the thought of only two people kept him going through the difficult time: his mother, Agnes, and his beautiful fiancée, Irene, coming from a low-income family where his mother was a widow from a very young age. Ethan decided to join the army and help his mother financially. He wanted to earn something so that he could return, marry the love of his life, and settle down, taking care of his mother. To his despair, things did not go as he had planned. He couldn't believe it. He had never been wrong about anyone. How could he not see that Irene wasn't loyal? He remembered seeing nothing but love in her eyes. This news shocked the young man so much that it began to affect his mental health. He would have sudden outbursts of anger, punch walls, and argue with random people. As a result, he was barred from returning to the military. He had lost everything. Everything except his mother, of course. Agnes had worked hard all her life, working 2 shifts to make ends meet. She wanted the best for her son and finally felt content when he got a stable job in the army. But that happiness did not last. Instead, at such an old age, she was compelled to begin working again. She started working at a local factory, stitching clothes all day long. Sitting in that position caused her severe back pain, which did not go unnoticed by her son. Ethan decided that it was time to pull himself together. He couldn't keep punishing the only good person he had in life for his own mistakes and wrong choices. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything I have put you through, but I promise this is the end of your misery," he said one day. He had his head in her lap as she combed her fingers through his hair. "What do you mean, honey? The military isn't an option now," she stated. "I know. I found another job. It doesn't pay that well, but it will be enough to pay your medical bills and get you to quit your job." He looked up at her and smiled. She only had one son, no other child or husband, but she knew this one son would be enough for her. A tear rolled down her cheek, which she wiped right away. "Where did you get the job?" she asked. "At Luck Oil, as a truck driver," he said, knowing how his mother would react. "Wait, what? That oil company? The same one owned by Mr. Smith?" she asked, her voice getting louder with every word. Ethan nodded. "The same Mr. Smith whose son that bitch Irene ran off with?" "Ma, please don't say that about her." "What do you mean? First, she leaves you for another man. Then, she is the reason you lose your job in the military. And now, she will have you work under her new boyfriend." Agnes was yelling now. Just the idea of her son working for that man filled her with rage. "I can keep working until you find a better job." It took that entire evening for Ethan to convince his mother finally, but fortunately, he was able to do so. Living in a small town, finding a job was not easy. especially if you had a record of anger management issues. The following week, Ethan began his job at Luck Oil as a truck driver. He would spend days out on the road transporting their oil, getting only a few hours of sleep every day. Every time he felt exhausted, he would close his eyes and remember his mother, which was more than enough to get him going again. Although Ethan was gradually getting used to the work schedule, there was something about the behavior of Mr. Smith that didn't feel right. Any chance that the man would get to humiliate Ethan, he wouldn't miss it. It was as if he was looking for excuses to shout at him, not just at his own small mistakes, but even when some other driver did something wrong, Ethan would be blamed. At first, it felt as if it was just a coincidence, but eventually it became apparent that it was entirely intentional. Of course, Ethan didn't share this with his mother. She would have become defensive and forced him to quit. That was not an option for him. He needed this job. He needed to take care of his mother, and now he had no other opportunity. The discrimination continued, and daily it became harder for him to control his anger in that situation. It was as if they were trying their best to incite him, just so that he would have an outburst of rage. Ethan was smart enough not to fall for it until one day they crossed all boundaries. During the company audit, it came to light that somebody was stealing oil from the trucks. As expected, Mr. Smith came to Ethan and started accusing him of the theft. He could take anything, any accusation, but Ethan was not a thief. This is the one accusation he couldn't stand. He could feel his heartbeat racing with anger as his legs began shaking. "Listen, sir, everybody here knows what you've been doing with me this past month, but if there's one thing I'm not putting up with, it's being called a thief," Ethan said sternly. "So are you calling me a liar, saying that I've been targeting you unfairly?" Mr. Smith retorted. "I'm just saying I'm not the person who stole the oil. Find the real person who did," Ethan said, turning around to leave since he had had enough. "What else can you expect from the son of a whore who'd sleep with any man just to get a loaf of bread?" Mr. Smith snickered. It was as if all the anger Ethan had been storing for the past month was ready to flow out. How could someone say this about the woman who had done everything for him on her own? His jaws tightened, his fists clenched. It was as if he no longer had any control over his body. He was a different person now, a person who would do anything to protect his mother. He turned around, running towards his boss and knocking him onto the floor. He sat on his chest and began to punch him in the face. It took a while for the other drivers around him to understand what had just happened. They ran towards them, pulling Ethan off of Mr. Smith. Ethan couldn't help but notice Mr. Smith's expression when he was being dragged away. Despite being beaten up and having a bleeding nose, the older man was smiling. It was a smile of success, as if this was what he had wanted all along. That evening, Ethan returned home, and even before he could tell his mother about what had happened that day, the police came storming in and took him away. Agnes was left crying, wondering what her son had done to cause this. Only a day later, a friend from work came to visit her and told her about what had happened. Ethan was charged with assault and theft. Since the Smiths were wealthy and influential, they hired the best lawyers to fight this case against him. It didn't come as a surprise when Ethan was convicted of both crimes, beginning his time in prison. Prison life wasn't as tough as Ethan had expected it to be. There were only two things that bothered him there. The first was that he had become a victim of the plans the Smith had against him. Was it Irene who made them do this? He would often think to himself, why would she? He didn't even go after her, letting her live the life she wanted to. The second thing that bothered him even more was that his mother was all alone at this age, even though she did not deserve any of it. Days turned into months, and the same thoughts plagued Ethan's mind. One day, Eric, like the prison leader, came up to talk to him. Everybody in prison was afraid of Eric. That is the level of influence he had inside and outside the prison. He came from a wealthy family and was inside on some charges of drug abuse. When Eric came close to Ethan, the latter was worried if he had done something to upset him. But in reality, Eric would prove to be his savior. As it turned out, years ago, before Ethan had even joined the Army, he had helped save the lives of Eric and his entire family. Their car had gotten into an accident, leading to a fire. Everybody around them moved away, scared that the car would explode. The firefighters were still a few minutes away, and the entire family could lose their life at that time. It was at that moment that Ethan decided to step up. He rushed towards the car and pulled each family member out, one by one, bringing them to safety. He had no idea then that this act of courage would come back and reward him like this someday. He wanted to help Ethan out, so he used his influence to hire a private detective and the best lawyers to find the truth and free Ethan of his guilty charge. Soon, Ethan got to know the entire truth, which completely blew his mind away. This whole time, Irene hadn't left him. She had been abducted by Mr. Smith's spoiled son and was kept in that house against her will. They got the police to conduct a raid, finding her in that house. The Smiths were convicted of several crimes while Ethan was free on parole. After more than a year, he met Irene, who was still madly in love with him. He knew he couldn't be wrong about her. The two of them eventually married and began their life together, giving Agnes the life of ease she always deserved.
Jessica dreamed of being independent and successful from an early age. She studied hard, participated in all school and student Olympiads and competitions, and won prizes. In appearance, she was not particularly different, but if you looked closely, you could see a charming beauty in her. Jessica knew what she wanted, and she had big plans for life. Since her main goal was her studies and career, she had neither the time nor the desire for relationships with boys. She met Stephen at university, and she could not even think that this particular guy would change her whole life. He was not bad to look at. Many girls at university ran after him, and he did his best to impress only Jessica. Jessica was certainly flattered by the attention of such a guy, and she could not resist his long and romantic courtship. Afterwards, these meetings turned her head, and she fell head over heels in love with him. Many of my friends keep saying that this is true love, love for life. Stephen immediately noticed this beautiful girl with a charming smile, bright green eyes, framed by thick dark eyelashes and luxurious hair below the shoulders. And after a while, the guy realized that he was in love, and fortunately, the feelings were mutual. They started dating, and after some time passed, they got married. Very soon after the wedding, Jessica realized that she was pregnant. Stephen accepted this news with great joy, although they had not planned for children yet because they did not have anywhere to live on their own. They were each renting their homes, and there was simply nowhere to go. Stephen and Jessica worked hard to achieve their goal. When Jessica went on maternity leave, Stephen remained the main breadwinner. He was extremely hardworking and responsible, which is why he quickly climbed the corporate ladder, and his salary also increased. When their daughter Brittany was born, Jessica devoted herself to motherhood and taking care of the house. And a few years later, when their daughter was already going to kindergarten, they were finally able to buy an apartment. But at the family meeting, they decided that it was too early for Jessica to go to work. Brittany was often ill, and besides, Jessica attended various club meetings. And since all the grandmothers lived far enough away from them, there was no one to take care of the child except Jessica. Fortunately, Stephen's earnings by this point were decent enough, so there was enough for everything. Jessica was an excellent hostess. She cooked perfectly, and their house was as clean as if in a museum. Her husband was waiting for a hot, delicious dinner after work, and in the morning, he had pressed trousers and shirts ready for him. As time went on, Brittany had already started school, but Jessica still didn't work. No, she was not lazy. She just lost and forgot a lot of things in her profession during the time that she did not work in her specialty. Now, it was difficult to get back into the same rut. But Stephen did not insist. On the contrary, he liked his domestic wife. Brittany was 11 years old when Jessica realized that she was expecting a baby again. The ultrasound showed that they will have twins. At the appointed time, the boys were born and they looked just alike. But the children were born prematurely, so they were also very small. While she was feeding one, the other was crying, and vice versa. The days for Jessica were mixed up with the night. It's good that Brittany is already independent, Jessica thought, rocking her sons continuously. And it was true. Brittany not only kept up with her studies, lessons, and clubs, but she had time to help her mother, unlike Stephen. Coming home, Stephen began to take out his stress more and more on his wife, and Jessica became more and more immersed in everyday life with incessant screams, porridge, and diapers. She always tried to justify her husband's behavior, and she sincerely believed that most men accept children once they can already communicate and play with them. Moreover, her husband was very busy at work, and she knew this from him, as he often said, "This is not an apartment, but a kindergarten of some kind. Can I have a little rest after coming home from work? I've been working all day without leaving my office even for lunch, and that's why I want some peace at home." Well, these are children. How could she explain it to them? Jessica tried to calm her husband at such moments, but he only left, shutting himself in the room so that he would not be disturbed. Jessica laid out the blocks again and again, built pyramids, and played with the kids. She loved her children with all her heart, and it seemed to her that this was her destiny, and no matter how difficult it was for her without outside help, this situation is temporary, because children grow up so fast. But every day, the gap between the spouses became bigger and bigger. Claims, understatement, resentment, all this accumulated day after day, and at one moment poured out. Stephen came home from work earlier than usual, silently went into the room, opened the closet, and began to put his things in a suitcase. "Are you being sent on a business trip?" she asked, not understanding anything about what was happening. "I'm leaving," Stephen said quietly. "What do you mean? Where to?" And then Stephen broke down, perhaps for the first time in their entire life together. "I'm leaving you. Have you not looked in a mirror lately? Look who you've become like. I'm already tired of you with your eternal whining." "Is that all?" Jessica responded in a calm tone, but barely held back tears as she asked, "Are you tired of me?" "But why don't you just tell me about it? I thought you loved me. Your looks bother me. Have you seen yourself in nothing but sweatpants and sneakers, and you have an ever-present ponytail on your head? I'm not talking about makeup at all. All my friends' wives look like they're going to rock. You're like a dirty girl alone." Stephen spoke to his wife without mincing words. "What about the children?" Jessica asked in a somewhat detached voice. "And what about the children? They will grow up and understand. I will help financially. I will leave this apartment to you, although I could take my share." She turned around and left the room. Tears blurred her eyes, but she tried to hide her face, as she had pride and dignity since childhood. Grandma used to say, no matter how hard it is for you, don't show it to a person who intentionally wants to offend you. If you're going to cry, then do it into a pillow. Meanwhile, Stephen seems to have taken his things and left the apartment. After crying until morning, she never closed her eyes, and in the morning, having cleaned herself up, she tried to behave as if nothing had happened. She could not hide her mood from Brittany, so she had to tell her what had happened. Her daughter's reaction startled her. Jessica was afraid that her daughter would cry or withdraw into herself, but Brittany calmed her mother as best she could, assuring her that she would help with everything and that they would live no worse than others. From that day on, their lives changed abruptly. All funds began to run out quickly, and there was no help from Stephen. When Jessica tried to contact him by phone, a woman who introduced herself as Stephen's new love picked up the phone and, not in the mildest form, asked them not to bother them anymore. Jessica didn't know what to do. It was necessary to find a job urgently because the twins had already started going to the nursery. But no one was eager to hire a woman with 3 children, especially with 2 of them being so young. One day, after failing another interview, Jessica got upset and drank coffee and looked out the window analyzing her life. A phone call interrupted her thoughts. Her friend, who she studied at the institute with, called and was very friendly. Realizing that something had happened to Jessica, she quickly asked for a visit. When her friend Gloria arrived at the apartment, Jessica told her to have a look around. "It's no wonder Stephen ran away," Gloria said from the doorway. "I'm sorry, but you look like a housebug. Tell me, where did that Jessica that laughed all the time that I once knew go?" "I'm not laughing right now. Do you need help with work? Do you have anything in mind for me?" Jessica asked with a heavy sigh. Gloria thought about it. "There is, but for this you need a transformation." They spent the rest of the day shopping and chose an outfit for Jessica. Then they went to the beauty salon for a new hairstyle, manicure, and makeup. After 2 days, Jessica was in a hurry for an interview for the position of administrator in the most prestigious hotel in the city. The director was Gloria's husband's brother, so Jessica was given the job without hesitation. In addition, she immediately made friends with the team, mainly consisting of girls about her age. Jessica made friends with one of the other girls, who offered to cover Jessica's shifts if she ever needed it. At home, Brittany helped her with the twins. She took the kids from the nursery when Mom was at work. Stephen never got in touch, and he did not seek to see the children, for which angered Jessica. Jessica certainly liked almost everything at work, except for the uniform, which had to be worn by order of her superiors. But it seemed to Jessica that the length of the skirt was indecently short, which she immediately informed the director with a request to issue a longer dress. Having been refused, she decided to be patient and not get into trouble. This job was absolutely necessary for her, but she felt uncomfortable, often adjusting the hem of her skirt. Once an important guest stopped at their hotel, the girls told various tall tales about him, but the fact that everyone disliked him was an indisputable fact. "He is always dissatisfied with everything, finds fault with everything. Everyone dreams that he doesn't come on their shift," the maid Monica chattered. In general, from the conversations of colleagues, Jessica realized that he has a serious business and is friends with the director of the hotel. Therefore, it was necessary to please him, otherwise you could lose your job. And already on Jessica's next shift, an unpleasant incident happened. It all started with the fact that the room attendant of this guest came running all in tears. Then he called the administrator for an explanation, and Jessica, anxious about the situation, hurried to settle it. On the one hand, she really wanted to look at this man since he stopped by, and he wasn't on her shift, and on the other hand, it was scary. "Well, I suppose he won't bite," Jessica thought after knocking on the room. When the room opened, she saw a handsome middle-aged man, but with a very dissatisfied face, which did not bode well. The man was wearing only trousers, which made Jessica feel embarrassed and blush a little, but he quickly went on the offensive. "What kind of administrator are you if you can't keep track of your employees?" he began. "But first, I would like to clarify the essence of your claims," Jessica said, trying to be as polite as possible, giving him her best charming smile. This discouraged the man a little, but only for a second. He continued menacingly. "Not only did she bring me a wet towel, but also the breakfast was cold. Do you think I should eat this slop?" Having said that, he knocked over the breakfast tray on the floor. Naturally, all its contents were immediately absorbed and smeared on the expensive carpet. The room was considered one of the best. His act caused a storm of indignation on the part of Jessica, who no longer tried to restrain herself. "Do you know who you are? You are a real cad. You would do well to learn good manners. You seem to be able to withdraw business, but alas, not to communicate with people. Do you think that since you are a wealthy man and a friend of the owner, that everyone here should be afraid of you and worship you? You're wrong. And let me be fired today, but I will not be silent. Apparently, the truth was said about you that you are a real snob and a fool." Saying this, Jessica stomped out of the room, constantly tugging her skirt. She did not see that he remained standing, looking after her. Jessica immediately went to write a statement, realizing that after the incident, dismissal was inevitable. When she entered the director's office, she found him on the phone. He motioned her to a chair, inviting her to sit down and wait, and then learning about the reason for her visit. He said there had been a misunderstanding, and he had no complaints about her. Early in the morning, the next working day, a surprise awaited Jessica. A huge bouquet of unique and insanely beautiful flowers was on the table, and inside it was a note from which she understood the sender's name. It was the fool with whom she had quarreled the day before. His name was Jacob, and he invited Jessica to dinner that evening. Naturally, Jessica, by virtue of her nature, considered this just a mockery, so she decided to ignore the invitation. But she couldn't help but think about him often. After that, Jessica went to the hospital with the boys. It turned out that they had fallen from their rocking chair together and received severe bruises and concussion. The nurse who came into the room asked Jessica to come out to the waiting room. Jessica was amazed when she saw that Jacob was waiting for her, shifting from one foot to the other. He timidly invited her to talk outside. After making sure that the children were asleep, Jessica went outside. "I came to apologize. You didn't come to dinner then, after that incident. I think about you all the time. I have not met such girls for a long time who are not afraid to stand up for themselves, even at the cost of their work. You're proud, and I like it. And also," Jacob hesitated a little, "let me take care of you." "But I have 3 children who I love dearly. How do you see it?" Jessica said in a trembling voice. "Wonderful! I adore children. I'm sure we can be friends." A few years later, Jessica and Jacob had a daughter together, and the whole family went on vacation. At the airport, Jessica accidentally ran into her ex-husband Stephen, who could hardly recognize his wife, a stunningly beautiful young woman. Noticing him, none of the children wanted to approach him. Jessica passed by, feeling his gaze on her. Stacy constantly cursed fate for how long she had to die. It all started with mild ailments, which she did not attach importance to, but then noticed that she was getting weaker. Previously, work had brought her pleasure, but now by the end of the day, she felt completely exhausted and went to bed as soon as she came home. Then Stacy took a vacation and went to rest with her husband. But there she only got worse and had to go to the doctor. So, she learned a disappointing diagnosis. Although at first, she was still told that it was possible to recover. It would just be long and difficult. Over time, the doctors became increasingly gloomy. She had few relatives by blood, and she was far away, so she began to communicate with her friends less and less, and even her husband distanced himself. She understood it wasn't easy for him either, but that didn't make her any less bitter. The slow decline was painful for her. She would much rather accept a quick death than prolong her days month after month. She began to walk with a cane, slowly, like an old woman. And then the day came when her legs refused. The very next day, her husband Brian began to persuade her to go to the hospital, although the doctor said there was no difference whether she would be there or at home. Stacy wanted to stay at home, and yet she let herself be persuaded. Maybe at least it would be easier for him. But every day it became increasingly unbearable to stay there. And when the doctor said that she had a week or 2 left, no more, she still asked to go home. Brian stood in the hospital corridor and watched his sick, dying wife being loaded into an ambulance. He looked after her and did not want to believe that such a burden would fall on his shoulders. He stared and stared until the doctor's voice pulled him out of his heavy thoughts. Brian looked at the elderly, cheerful man in a white coat and did not understand the words. The doctor seemed to move his lips without any sound, and Brian unsuccessfully tried to make out what he was saying. The doctor looked sternly at the patient's husband, as if realizing that he did not understand the words he said. "Can you hear me? Good. Look, we did everything we could. Your wife is dying. So let her spend her last days with the man who loves her. Just be with her. She doesn't ask for more. And who knows? Maybe God will have mercy. It's not for nothing that her name is Stacy," the doctor said. He paused for a moment and continued. "I would advise you not to hire a nurse, because she has a couple of weeks left at most. The doctor left, and only the smell of medicines remained hanging in the air like a disembodied spirit. Brian looked back towards the ambulance. They were waiting for him. Then everything happened as if in a terrible dream. A man watched as a car drove up to his high-rise building, brought his wife into the apartment, and placed her on the bed. 2 hours had passed since his sick, dying wife had been brought to his apartment. Brian could not come to terms with this. "Brian, my dear, come to me," the wife pleaded hoarsely, but he did not come. "Thank you, my dear, for taking me and sheltering me. I so want to die next to you in our apartment, where we were happy." She coughed heavily with some deep, gurgling sound. He covered his ears with his palms and plopped down on the chair with force, and it creaked loudly. He wanted to respond, but he couldn't. Brian spread out the sofa and went to bed, hoping that his wife would not survive the stress of the trip and would die by morning. But his hopes were not destined to come true. Brian woke up an hour before the alarm clock, and he made himself a coffee and went into the bedroom. His wife was sleeping, still breathing. For some reason, this fact angered him so much that he barely restrained himself from screaming. He was shaking all over with anger. Brian stormed into the kitchen and threw the mug against the wall with all his might. The brown liquid flowed in a large stain over the floor tile, on which not a single scratch was found. He exhaled heavily and began to cry. He was sitting on a chair, and tears of impotence and hopelessness were quietly flowing from his eyes. It was so good when she was finally admitted to the hospital. He could start a new life. He was so deeply immersed in his own thoughts that he shook with indignation and anger. He quickly caught himself when the doorbell rang and hurried to the door and opened it. "What took you so long?" A young beauty was standing there impatiently, holding 2 large glasses of to-go coffee in her hands. "Hush! They brought mine back," Brian quickly said in a whisper. He looked around anxiously, although he understood that his wife would not be able to get up on her own. He stared at the young mistress, who shrugged her shoulders and entered the apartment as if nothing had happened. She took root here during the time that Brian's wife was in the hospital. The girl went into the kitchen. Brian was so angry. "What are you doing?" "You said she was very sick, that she was dying, so she wouldn't get up. Come here, I've missed you," the girl, whose name was Jody, said quickly in a loud whisper, snuggling up to the man. She kissed him with such fervor that he could not resist. When they finished, he had to go to his wife's bedroom, sending the girl to the shower to continue there with her. The husband brought his wife a glass of water, gave her pills, and went into the shower, continuing to have fun. That's where they came up with a plan to get rid of his wife. He was looking forward to being alone with this beauty soon and being able to do whatever he wanted again. After all, his wife would leave him all the wealth, and she was far from poor since she had been working all this time. After her death, he and the new woman will not have to work at all. The girl left, leaving Brian alone with his dying wife. He began to collect her things. Brian packed a full bag and dragged it into the car. Having laid out the back seat in the car, he covered it with a thick blanket and then returned to the apartment and immediately went to his wife. She literally lit up with happiness when she saw him. "My dear, how I missed you. How good it is that you are next to me," the woman said, barely smiling, as she didn't have enough strength for anything else. "Stacy, listen. I have a friend who will help you. If we have no hope for medicine, then we will heal ourselves. I'll take you to a healer now, and he'll help you." Brian lied briefly on the move, trying not to look into her dull, almost colorless eyes. Brian took his wife in his arms and carried her to the car. She weighed almost nothing. Her body seemed to consist of nothing but bones. Brian was disgusted even to hold her in his arms, and nausea came to his throat from the smell of pills that soaked through her skin. He put her in the back seat, covered her with a blanket, and got behind the wheel. He started the car and drove away from the city. They drove for more than 4 hours until they found themselves in a deep forest. He wanted to throw her right in the woods at first, but then he caught sight of an abandoned old house that apparently belonged to a gamekeeper or some local hermit. Brian took his wife in his arms and carried her into the house. He left her on the big bed and left without saying a word. Stacy knew he was leaving her in this old house. She understood that her husband would not come back. He laid her on the bed, and tears of despair and understanding ran from her eyes that she would die of hunger, here, all alone. She looked at him, but Brian averted his eyes. He also understood that everything had become clear to her. Brian left, started his car, and disappeared into the distance. Stacy was lying on a huge bed and crying, unable to turn around or get up. Her mouth soon dried up, and her whole body began to ache, and she really needed to use the bathroom, but no one else would help her. Stacy fell into oblivion, then woke up again, but at some point, she realized that she was not alone in the house. "Here, have a drink. It will make you feel better," said a man whose face was blurring before her eyes. Stacy took a few sips but couldn't go any further. Then the man lifted her head with a big hand and helped her finish the drink. She fell asleep again. Stacy woke up much later, and that's when she saw that some man with a beard was watching her. He came up to her, smiled, and said, "Good morning. You finally come to your senses. And I've always said nature heals everything." She had never felt this good in the last 4 years of her illness. There was no pain, and everything cleared up in her eyes. She even felt that she could breathe deeply. "My husband brought me here because he wanted to leave me. The doctors refused me, and then my husband. I thought I was going to die here alone," Stacy admitted a bit haphazardly. "You won't die. Now you definitely won't die since the drugs help. I've been taking care of you for 2 months. I kept thinking that you wouldn't pull through, but you clung to life as best you could. That's it. Now you won't fall into such oblivion. You'll see. You'll be back on your feet in a couple of weeks. Just don't be afraid. I have a dog, and he slept with you all the time here at the foot of the bed. You may not remember him, but he's kind and good. His name is Dick. He stayed with you when I went to the forest," the man said with a smile. "Your husband is a scumbag. Marriages are made in heaven. God has sent you this test." "Excuse me, but why do you live in the forest?" suddenly asked Stacy, who decided to change the subject. "Me? I became a beggar, fired from work, and the bank took the house. I had to beg in the city, and there I met Dick. And then he went into the woods and led me to this house. I have established relationships with local villagers. I help them with household chores for groceries. That's how I got settled, and I've been living here for 2 years. I would be glad to return to society, but I have neither money nor the opportunity," the man said with a sad smile. They talked until the morning. So week after week went by, and along with gratitude, love blossomed in Stacy's soul. They understood each other without a word. Stacy had never felt so happy, but one day when she was completely stronger, she decided to leave. He let her go, even though he didn't believe she would ever come back. Stacy was too beautiful for him, too well off to spend the rest of her life with a beggar somewhere in the deep woods. He took her to the village, where they took her to the city. Stacy went to her lawyer first, and a real nightmare began. It turned out that her husband had almost registered her as deceased, and there were only a few days left before the verdict of the court was announced. But Stacy made huge efforts to stop it and fought for more than 1 day. The court's decision was overturned, then Stacy withdrew all the money from her account and bought a good house in a small town with good infrastructure nearby. She repurchased her car that her husband had pawned, but she never showed her face to him. Stacy immediately got behind the wheel and drove to that very remote forest to that house. When the man who had healed her, whose name was Jack, came out, he was happy to see his beloved, who had disappeared for 2.5 weeks. "Get ready, I bought us a house, and bring Dick. There's a big yard there. And don't, Jack, just don't be embarrassed, you saved my life. And I'll give us a new home," she said triumphantly, hugging him. By the evening, they were in a new modern cottage, enjoying every minute spent together. Stacy still did not believe that she had not only survived there in the deep forest, but also met her happiness. When the lawsuit came to Brian in court, he could not believe his eyes. It's been 6 months since he took his wife to die in the woods. He didn't even realize what was going on right away. He appeared in court and was stunned to see a healthy, beautiful wife next to a large, handsome man who hugged her like a hefty bear. And against his background, Brian seemed like a puny reed. The divorce thundered for Brian like a bolt from the blue. He looked at the court order and did not believe that he remained a beggar. His wife's account, his wife's apartment, even the old country house belonged to his wife, and he was left without a job, without an education, absolutely unfit for independent life. Naturally, Jody left him a long time ago, having found a more satisfying place. He rushed from his place to his wife to beg for forgiveness. But a hefty man overshadowed the fragile Stacy. Brian did not dare to act, and he retreated, seeing off the beautiful couple. It was all over. Brian was so happy when he finally left his wife to die in the woods. He was so happy having fun with his young and beautiful mistress. He thanked fate every day for such a wonderful plan. And now what? Now he would have to go back to his mother and live with her until he got his life back on track. Brian soberly assessed the situation and understood that he would not be able to get settled and would rely on his mother. It was a late, warm summer evening. Stacy was sitting on a wide bench in the garden, her head resting on Jack's shoulder. He was hugging her, holding her close, and Stacy felt sure she had never been so happy. Stacy looked at her future husband and thanked him for saving her life. If it weren't for him, she would have died there in the woods. He looked at her and thanked her for her love, for the house, for a new job, and for happiness. If it weren't for her, he would have spent years alone in the forest. It was as if they were sent to each other by fate. The lovers were sitting in the garden, inhaling the scent of herbs after the rain. They just enjoyed each other and were happy that they could be together.
Muffin arrived at the school later than the others. She was undergoing a challenging course of treatment. For several years, was homeschooled. By this time, the children at the school had managed to become friends. The class developed their relationship, and the first love couples appeared. Brian was in love with Emma and sometimes walked her home. Paul was inseparable from Anna. Steve spent a long time unsuccessfully courting the class's top hottie, Sophia. However, all the boys loved Sophia, even from other classes. She was beautiful, blonde, with green eyes. Sophia was not very successful in her studies, although she was very successful with the boys. She was the recognized queen of the class. On that day, 2 students, Muffin and Fred Crane, came to the school. Fred immediately attracted the attention of the entire class. A humble guy with dark hair and a friendly smile, whom both teachers and girls and even boys liked. He was well-versed in all the lessons, was polite, friendly, and did not participate in conflicts. He treated all warmly and affably. Surprisingly, he did not pay much attention to the beautiful Sophia. The queen of the class is accustomed to the increased awareness of boys. She wondered why the new Fred was friendly to Lisa, Stephanie, and Judy. He treated Sophia like everyone else, warm, kind, and nothing more. In the beginning, Muffin didn't even attract the students' attention. Everyone was busy discussing Fred's appearance and preparing for Stephanie's party. Muffin was sitting next to Fred. 2 new students sat together, but did not pay attention to each other. It is not surprising that no one remembered Muffin. No one knew her name, although teachers approached her. A lumbering body, fat legs, thick cheeks, and colorless hair. That's what the new girl looks like. She didn't bother anyone, answered the teacher's questions, and didn't talk to anyone. The nickname, Muffin, stuck to her at once. No one remembered that the colorless girl was called Heather. She did not interest anyone. Soon it turned out that Heather had unpleasant breathing. When she was anxious or rushing, she began to breathe unnaturally. The girl put a tube in her mouth during the attack, restoring her breath. This caused her to be squeamish. She was called a muffin because of her loose body and plump face. At first, Everyone was indifferent to her. Her classmates simply did not notice her. The situation escalated when it became clear that Fred was sympathetic to Heather. No, he was not in love with her. It was impossible to fall in love with a loose, colorless creature with unpleasant breath. But he treated her well. The girl could easily share her school supplies if Fred didn't hear the assignment. Some topics that Heather didn't understand, Fred could explain to her. It wasn't friendship, but relations with her desk mates were good. The beginning of the feud was Sophia. A pretty girl in the class could not forgive an ordinary girl for the attention of a good guy. One day, Sophia offered Fred to sit next to her in class, but the guy refused. He politely replied that he had arranged with Heather to do a joint project. Beauty harbored evil. From that moment on, Heather was no longer just an unremarkable girl. She became the true enemy of the class queen. You can't say that Sophia was madly in love with Fred, but the friendly guy turned out to be inaccessible to her. He was not under the spell of the beauty. He communicated with Sophia just as he talked to Stephanie, Anna, Emma, and even Muffin. One day, the first unpleasant situation occurred. That day, Sophia was in a perfect mood. She was wearing a bright red sweater and blue jeans. These clothes suited the girl very much. The beauty had a good mood. On this day, she was in the mood to joke about Heather. "What is it?" said Sophia, and she poked Heather's backpack with a delicate finger. The girl looked timidly at the queen of the class. She did not understand what the angry beauty wanted from her. Sophia squeamishly poked her knapsack with her fingernail. "It's mud," she said, ringing and laughing. The other guys were laughing too. "That's not dirt," said Heather quietly. "There you go, mud. It's like dough." Sophia kept laughing. Her beautiful eyes were shining. The laughter was ringing. At that point, she was more beautiful than usual. "Bread dough," Steve laughed angrily. Everyone liked the joke so much that laughter filled the audience. Heather became worried and began to breathe heavily. She was depressed and hurt. Fred did not laugh with everyone, but did not stand up for the girl. When Heather began to suffocate, Sophia began to intimidate her. She stuck out her tongue and began to breathe loudly. The guys started to laugh even more. "Dough for muffin! Dough for muffin!" said Steve. The other guys started shouting that phrase too. Fred got a little confused. He was uncomfortable with the situation. Fred felt terrible for Bread, but could not stand up to the whole class. He thought he should have supported the poor girl, but he didn't know how to help her. Fred was scattered over the books on his desk. The girl got better. Soon the lessons began. Fred couldn't concentrate on the task. He thought Heather was mad at him. "She'll probably never talk to me again," the guy thought. He didn't know if it was good or bad. Sometimes he regretted getting so close to Muffin. Befriending an outcast girl robbed him of many joys. But he couldn't break up with her. Somehow she touched his heart. Muffin was very different from the other girls of that age. She was kind and understanding. She made him feel comfortable. Like the other boys at school, Fred liked Sophia very much, but something about Heather made her tender and made him want to take care of her. He didn't want to take care of Sophia. Fred sat the whole lesson and did not look at Heather, but at the end of the study, he felt her hand touch his elbow. "Fred, I've lost my pencil. Can you give me yours?" Heather whispered. A wave of relief came over Fred. He was happy that the girl had found a reason to talk to him. He gladly gave her a pencil and crossed her eyes. Heather was smiling. He wanted so much to do something for her, and soon he had an opportunity to do something good for her. Unfortunately, good intentions have come to naught. There was a lot of talk in class about Stephanie's party. A classmate was gathering guests at her house for the weekend. Her parents left town and let her daughter call her friends. Stephanie gave everyone a bright invitation card. Muffin and Fred got invited too. Heather was holding a colorful card. Fred heard the girl sigh. "Do you want to go?" he asked the neighbor with a smile. "No, of course," said Heather sadly. "Why?" said Fred. In his head, he scolded himself for asking. He understood that the gentle, shy girl with her appearance should not have come to the party. There were going Sophia, Emma, and Anna. These are real sharks that could hurt vulnerable Heather. At the same time, Fred understood how much she wanted to have fun. After all, this has never happened in her life. Perhaps she wanted to wear a beautiful dress and have fun with friends. She just did not have any good friends, and she deserved fun and some friends. "Come with me," Fred asked the girl, looking into her eyes. Heather's cheeks were covered with blush. She looked at the boy with huge, colorless eyes, with wonder and hope. At that moment, she was almost beautiful, but after a second, the hope in her eyes disappeared. The girl mentally returned to reality. "Thanks, Fred. I'm not going," said Heather, pretending to read. The boy felt a strong desire to make the girl happy. He thought that if Heather came to this party, the guys would see her qualities. They would appreciate her kindness and sincerity. He determined to help Heather. "You're coming with me, and it's out of the question," said Fred firmly. And then he added, "I want you to wear the most beautiful dress. Do you have one?" "Yes, actually," said Heather with a happy smile. Sometimes she was invited to holidays, but when she refused, no one insisted or talked her into it. On that day, Stephanie Adams' house was full of young guests. Loud music was playing. Sophia came in a bright green dress. It was very shining in her emerald eyes. The figure of the girl was great. The guys looked at her shapes with lust, but she did not pay attention to anyone. Sophia had a clear plan to get close to Fred. She was sure that the obstacle to their love was Heather. He spent so much time with an unattractive, ugly, pitty girl from a pitiful school. There was simply no way to communicate with Fred without her in class. Today is a great chance because there will be no ugly muffin next to him, thought Sophia. She was beautiful today. Sophia was sure that Fred would come. He was a little late. The guys were all gathered and making a lot of noise. Sophia looked at the door. She was waiting for Fred. No one was expecting what happened next. Amid the fun, Fred entered the house. He was wearing a suit that suited him very well. He was holding Heather's hand. All the guys looked at the strange couple with surprise. The muffin looked strange. The dress was beautiful, but not very good for a total girl. The makeup was not on her. Her hair was neat and attractive, but colorless. Heather smiled affably. Her smile was timid. Stephanie was surprised but invited the guests to join the company. The first half hour was good. Everyone continued to do their business. At first, no one noticed the queen of Sophia's class was in a bad mood. Fred never left her side, serving her drinks and sandwiches. He even tried to involve a shy girl in the conversation. It was time to dance. Fred was going to invite Heather, but Sophia was cleverly ahead of him. She went up to the guy and asked him to dance. Heather nodded timidly. The whole dance, Sophia snuggled up to the boy. He liked her. He didn't want to turn into a timid admirer of the entourage of the recognized queen. Fred mentally noted how beautiful Sophia was today. She was so temptingly snuggled up to him. He did not notice that the dance was over and the next song began. In the second slow song, he danced with beautiful Sophia. At the end of the second dance, He thought he did not want to return to Heather. He even regretted taking her with him on such a day. She prevented him from having fun with her presence. He could dance and have fun with the beautiful Sophia. Instead, he had to take care of Heather. Fred apologized to Sophia and went to Heather. Steve approached the beauty. He had long been in love with Sophia, but resentful, Sophia pushed the guy away. "Can't you see that your Fred is stuck to Muffin? He doesn't want you," he said to Sophia. This was the humiliation the girl could not stand. Sophia jumped up to Heather and yanked her arm, screaming, "Why did you come to this party? You were not expected here. You are an ugly, stupid creature." All the guys began to look at what would happen next. Heather looked at the furious beauty. Sophia continued, "You're ruining everyone's life. Scary people like you should stay at home and not go to cool parties." Heather got excited. She started to breathe heavily. Fred helped her take the medication to help her live. He gave her the tube. All the guys were looking at him. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't respond to Sophia rudely. He didn't want to take care of Heather anymore. She was really in his way. She was a stranger at the party. But Fred wasn't mad at himself for bringing a girl with him. He was angry with her. She was breathing so severely, her ugliness didn't even save a beautiful dress. Heather's breath was back to normal. What happened next surprised everyone. Heather got up, looked at everyone with colorless eyes, and said quietly, "You're all evil, cruel people here. I came here only because of Fred. He is the only kind and noble man among you. I will leave, and he will leave with me. I am happy at your school because I met this guy. He is not like you. When we graduate, he will be married and have many beautiful, intelligent, kind children." At first, they listened to her in silence, but at the end of her speech there was laughter. Sophia burst out. Her laughter was loud and contagious. Then Steve and Stephanie and the other guys started laughing. Fred was silent. The guys weren't just laughing at Heather, they were teasing him too. They mocked him because of Muffin. Fred jumped up and yelled at Heather, "Shut up! Shut up! You are a stupid, disgusting creature. Shut up! I only brought you here because I felt sorry for you. Look at you. You're ugly and stupid." Heather fell silent in fear. Then her breathing became uneven again. She was helping herself breathe the drug, but it was no longer helping. The girl began to suffocate. At first, everyone laughed at her situation. The shortness of breath of a fat girl looked funny. Someone even mimicked her. Emma was the first to notice that Heather had become quite ill. She called the ambulance. An emergency came quickly, but the girl was already unconscious. Heather was taken away to hospital. No one knew what happened next with Heather. The next day, she didn't come to school. She didn't go to school with the guys anymore. No one even talked about Muffin anymore. It became taboo. All the guys understood they were involved in something terrible. The years passed, and everyone slowly forgot about the colorless girl. Fred and Sophia became a couple. After graduation, they married. Sophia was a demanding girl, and her young husband did not have enough money for her desires. She constantly talked about him finding a job. The relationship between the couple was not always perfect. The young wife was scandalous and capricious. Soon, Sophia came home with flaming eyes. The prestigious company was recruiting young employees. Sophia forced Fred to submit his resume. The girl sent her resume too. Working in a prestigious company was very well paid. If they could both get a job at the office of this organization, they could buy a house right away. Unfortunately, no one replied to their CVs. Sophia wrote letters to the organization, but the company sent them a polite refusal. After a month, a persistent girl still managed to get a meeting with the head of the company. Sophia was convinced that she and Fred were skilled professionals. She believed that ordinary people were mistakenly refusing them. At the interview, Sophia and Fred came together. The organization was located in a beautiful building with modern renovations. The guys were taken to a luxurious office to the head. A beautiful young woman in an elegant costume offered Fred and Sophia a gesture to sit down. Something subtly familiar was on her face. "My name is Heather Donnelly. I am listening to you," said the lady. The name also seemed familiar to the guys. Sophia immediately presented the documents and began to tell the company director about their capabilities. She spoke for herself and her husband. Fred was silent. Sophia said a lot. Heather Donnelly listened to her attentively. "Why are you so silent?" said Fred's lady with a smile. With that smile, she turned everything upside down on him. He recognized Muffin. But how did she change? She became subtle, graceful. It was an impossible change for her. The face was hers, but at the same time completely different. She had a lovely look with expressive blue eyes. Her hair was blonde in a sharp bundle. Fred was struggling to breathe. Heather Donnelly asked anxiously, "Are you all right, Mr. Crane? Are you having trouble breathing? Should I call our doctor?" Fred shook his head negatively. His breathing was still heavy. Sophia was displeased that her husband looked so ridiculous at the time. "I had an asthma medication with me years ago, but I don't need it anymore. So if it's hard for you, I can call our doctor. Unfortunately, I don't have any medicine with me," the manager continued. Fred refused help. He was distraught. He remembered everything. He remembered the naive, ugly Muffin. He remembered how Sophia was torturing her. He remembered betraying a quiet, humble girl. "Heather," he whispered. The wife glanced at Fred angrily, and at that moment, she also got struck. Sophia's face turned red. "Muffin," she whispered. Heather smiled with restraint. "Yes, we know each other, and now, unfortunately, we do not need specialists for your profile. Our staff is already sufficiently staffed. We hired employees with higher qualifications, but you were so persistent, I can only offer you a position of service staff. But I think you will decline." Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. "Of course we won't take it," she roared. She was a qualified professional. Heather dared offer her the role of a maid, cleaner, or dishwasher. Sophia jumped out of her chair and ran to the exit. She gestured to Fred. Before leaving, Fred met Heather's light blue eyes. Her gaze expressed pity. There was no past resentment or anger in that look. But there was no longer the trust that Fred had in her many years ago. She forgave the betrayal. Fred was struck with terrible remorse. The couple was driving home in a taxi. Sophia hissed angrily at her husband. She was furious that a former classmate had done this to them. She was even angrier that Muffin had become successful and beautiful. She even thought that Fred's feelings for Heather had been awakened. And Fred rode in silence. His soul was tormented with remorse. He saw and remembered those blue eyes. He knew he would never forget them again. And Fred knew he'd never be able to look at his wife with love again.
Many years have passed since Dick's father left him with his mother, but this trauma remained forever in his soul. Now, he remembered his mother's tears, her confusion, misunderstanding, and wondering how to move on. As for him, he was experiencing such a difficult feeling of disconnection from reality because of what had happened. He couldn't believe that Dad could do this just because he liked some other woman. Dick had replayed this episode in his head many times in adulthood, but he did not change his opinion. He will be a good father to his children, and they will not have to go through what he went through. And a good husband for the one he chooses to marry. When he first saw Melanie, he immediately thought that she was the one. But until the moment of their wedding, several more years passed. And now, remembering all the years they had lived together, he thought that fulfilling the promise made to himself was not difficult at all. After all, he loved his family very much. This year, he will definitely try not to forget about their wedding anniversary. Melanie was finishing her makeup in front of her favorite dressing table with quick movements. There were only finishing touches left, but she was already a little late for work. She wasn't particularly worried. Anyway, the boss was always late. If you came in 10 to 15 minutes late, no one would notice. The apartment was unusually quiet, all because Dick had already taken the children to kindergarten. He was only in the office for lunch today. Early in the morning, Melanie noticed that for some reason, Dick had grabbed a bunch of keys for their country house from the closet. She accidentally saw him hurriedly put them in his pocket. "Why do you need those keys to our country house?" she asked. Dick hesitated. I'll drop in there before work," Dick finally said. "I left some tools there, and a colleague asked me to borrow them. Can you fill up the pool at the same time? We will go there this weekend, and the water will have already warmed up," Melanie suggested and hurried to the kitchen. The children had to be woken up already. She wanted to have time to drink a cup of coffee in peace and quiet. "No, I can't fill up the pool. I'm literally going to run there for 10 minutes, tools and back," Dick said. "Well, we'll fill it up together this weekend," Melanie sighed. The morning went on as usual, and the children, as usual, did not want to wake up and go to the garden. Melanie gave the role of negotiator to Dick. Dick was always better than she was at influencing their daughters. Father of the Year, coped with a difficult task. And now, for a few minutes later, the bathed girls were already sitting in the living room waiting for the traditional morning toasts with sweet tea. And how does he do it? Melanie wondered once again. She herself could not boast of such patience and diplomatic talent. And her sense of humor, which Dick actively used in communicating with children, refused her in the morning. Melanie completed her makeup by covering her lips with cherry gloss, admired the result a little in the mirror, and winked at herself. Yes, after all, he was lucky to have her as his wife, and he himself often said so. Never skimped on compliments and gifts. In all the 10 years of family life, Melanie thanked fate for Dick more than once. She felt good with him, calm and fun. But other colleagues often complained about their spouses, and Melanie even felt uncomfortable because she could not support such a conversation. After all, both Dick and her were satisfied with absolutely everything. It had been 10 years since the wedding, and he had proved many times in practice that Melanie made the right choice by becoming his wife. He was wonderful to her when they dated. She was a pretty girl, and at the time she had a lot of male suitors. But she did not experience the pleasant feeling of kinship of souls and confidence with the others as she did with Dick. Of course, Dick had minor flaws, but Melanie even liked it. Otherwise, she would feel too imperfect against the background of an ideal husband. For example, Dick was bad at remembering dates, even about the upcoming birthdays of his relatives, Melanie reminded him. So today, Dick forgot about the important holiday of the decade of their anniversary, but Melanie was not offended because she knew the peculiarity of her husband and perfectly saw how important their family was to him. Melanie was expecting a call sometime around lunchtime when Dick finally called. She was looking forward to how he would blame himself for forgetfulness in a guilty voice and, of course, arrange some surprise in the evening. In the office, she was immediately wrapped up in business. It turned out that a check from Washington is expected the other day. Melanie was overwhelmed with work, so she skipped lunch. It was only in the late afternoon that she finally sorted out her urgent tasks and poured herself a cup of coffee. At that moment, her phone beeped. Melanie accepted the call without even looking at the screen, and she was sure it was Dick. I remembered their anniversary and called with congratulations. To hear a familiar and encouraging voice was just what was needed now. But a neighbor at the country house called, who lived next to them with her husband and children. They had daughters about the same age, and this brought the neighbors closer together, turning them into good friends. Families often arranged joint trips to the countryside, fishing, kebabs, and gatherings around the campfire. Such events were always fun and noisy. Melanie's friend Jenny started the conversation. "Hi, how are you doing? You sound really tired." "Hi, I'm just starting to have lunch at work," Melanie replied. "Wow, it's almost 5 o'clock. "Well, yes, it happens sometimes," Melanie said. "And how do you keep up with everything?" Jenny asked. She did not work, and she was busy with the house and children. "I don't understand it myself," Melanie admitted. "I don't even know how to ask," Jenny hesitated, clearly not daring to start a conversation on some awkward topic. "Do you need to borrow money? Don't be shy. Tell me how much you need, and I'll help you out," Melanie said. "No, that's not the point. Just wanted to ask. I wanted to ask," Jenny said. Melanie began to get annoyed and said, "I don't have time to talk for a long time. I need to have a snack faster and get back to work." "All right," Jenny decided. "Don't you live with Dick anymore?" "What?" Melanie almost fell out of her chair from the unexpected question. "What makes you think that?" "Well, he arrived in the morning," Jenny spoke excitedly. "Yes, not alone, with some woman and 2 children, and with a bunch of things. They were unloaded from the car for a long time, as if it's like moving." "I don't understand," Melanie whispered. "What things? What woman?" "Beautiful," Jenny said. "Full face of makeup, curvy, and smiling all the time. And your husband was talking to her incessantly, and also joyful. It looks like they're moving in together. I think they're going to live here. I thought he'd found another woman for himself, and even with children. I decided that you kicked him out of the apartment, so he came here with them all." "Jenny, I don't understand anything at all." "So you weren't even aware of it?" Jenny was surprised. Well, who would have thought? It's not like your husband at all. Let me send you a picture of them now, and you'll see for yourself." Melanie leaned back wearily in her chair. The conversation with Jenny seemed to knock her feet off the ground. Dick seemed to her the most reliable person in the world, and she was confident in him, already more than in herself. And now this call. And ironically, on their anniversary. Maybe he brought his sister. Melanie seized on the saving thought. She just has 2 children, and with her husband, always quarreling, suddenly left him. Dick invited them to the country house to stay. He just didn't have time to warn her. Then the phone beeped again. The promised photo from Jenny arrived. Dick was in the picture, and a completely unknown woman was next to him. Indeed, a very spectacular lady was in the photo. He took out huge suitcases from the trunk, looked at the beauty with happy eyes, smiled. She, too, was clearly in high spirits. Tears came to Melanie's eyes, because she felt his full betrayal. If Dick decided to live with this woman, then everything has been going on for a long time. But as a wife, she didn't notice anything before. After all, there must have been some signs. Really, she is so naive. How can you not notice that her husband has a serious relationship on the side? In fact, the second family since they decided to live together. Melanie did not know what to do. At first, she wanted to call her husband and tell him that she knew everything, and then she decided to act more effectively. It was decided that she would go to the country house in person and make her unfaithful spouse and this destroyer of families feel guilty and humiliated. It was not easy to ask the boss for time off, but in the end, of course, he agreed. "Okay, go solve your family problems. You look like you've seen a ghost. You don't have any work today anyway." On the way to the country house, Melanie called her mother and asked her to pick up the girls from kindergarten. She most likely won't have time until 7 p.m. today, and the scene promised to be ugly and loud. After all, she was unlikely to be able to go for the children. "Dick has already asked me to pick them up. Of course I will go for my granddaughters with pleasure," Melanie heard her say in response. That's how strange it is, she thought. Did Dick foresee this situation and take care in advance that the children were taken out of the garden during the time? Of course, he turned out to be a pathetic husband, but he still remained a caring father. Melanie drove without being careful on the road and almost got into an accident a couple of times because her thoughts were spinning in her head. Her world, which seemed happy, strong, and unshakable, was collapsing. How could he? What to do now, and why didn't she notice anything? Questions crowded in her head and did not allow her to concentrate on the road. Burning tears were coming to her eyes, and now she would join the ranks of grumpy, abandoned women dissatisfied with life and men. Melanie used to think that we were to blame for our failures. They could not build a harmonious relationship with their spouses or somehow behaved incorrectly, and now she was one of them. At the beginning of the summer, Melanie and Dick allowed their daughters to decorate the high fence around the country house to their taste. They enthusiastically got down to business, and now the fence was covered with butterflies painted with acrylic paints on both sides, flowers and princesses. Seeing the creation of the children, Dick jokingly grabbed his head, and it seemed to her how cute everything was, and the pink beauty was unreal. Melanie, let's give our daughters a brother. Otherwise, we clearly lack in design, cars, and robots, Dick had joked. Brother, brother, the girls chanted then, clapping their hands. They obviously liked their father's idea, and Melanie didn't mind at all, and it wasn't scary with a husband like Dick, or that's what she thought. It's a good thing they didn't rush from plans to action. Otherwise, it would have been even harder now. This idyllic scene unfolded just a month and a half ago. Surely Dick was already secretly dating another woman. He had a relationship on the side and started talking about a third child? How could it have been 10 years to live with such a hypocrite next to her, and also consider him an ideal husband at the same time? Either she was completely stupid or her husband was a brilliant actor, one or the other. Melanie stopped at the neighbor's gate, got out of the car, with her heart pounding loudly, and approached her country house. Now she will have to ring her own doorbell as an outsider, and what if this woman opens it? Then what to do? But she didn't have to press the bell button. The door opened by itself. Dick hurried out into the street in shorts, a faded t-shirt, and old flip-flops. He had a package in his hands, apparently heading to a local store. When he saw Melanie, he was stunned and said, "What are you doing here?" With a confused smile, the man approached his wife and looked at her attentively and anxiously. "Did something happen? Why do you look like that?" He spoke softly. "Is everything okay with the kids?" I'm just going to see Jenny," Melanie lied badly. She could not begin the difficult conversation. She had thought out a heartfelt speech while she was driving, but now she saw Dick, and for some reason all the words flew out of her head. Dick was surprised and acted strangely. "You said you'd only take the tools for a colleague," Melanie reminded. "It's already evening and you're still here." "Yes, my plan has failed," Dick said thoughtfully. "I was waiting for you a little later." "What? Waiting?" "Yes, everything should have happened a little differently, but you know what? Well, it's okay. Wait a bit in the car, or at Jenny's, and I'll be right there." With these words, Dick disappeared through the door, not forgetting to turn the lock. Stunned, Melanie leaned against the fence. She did not expect such impudence, even in the current situation. Of course, her husband greatly disappointed her and made it clear that she was mistaken in him. But to slam the door in her face? To make her wait for something on the street? By the way, what was he doing? Morally preparing his new lover for a meeting with an angry wife? Melanie moved resolutely to the door. This was too much. Now she will face them both. She will bang on the gate until she gets inside, if necessary. She will climb over the high fence or call the police. Anger gave her strength and confidence. Just not to lose confidence again. Melanie had almost reached the door when it opened by itself. Dick was standing on the threshold, smiling. In a moment, he managed to pull himself together. The husband looked at her with a smile and held out his hand to her, inviting her into the garden. Melanie, who did not understand anything, looked around in surprise. The place was transformed beyond recognition. Garlands were hung everywhere. Tall figures depicting fairy tale characters could be seen here and there, and right under the spreading apple tree there was a table set for two. As soon as Melanie entered, beautiful music rang out. She turned around and saw 3 violinists in concert costumes next to the pool. And it seemed so amazing and unreal that Melanie was simply speechless. Dick was beside her, leading her by the hand to the table. The same woman came out on the porch of the house. She was the woman from the photo Jenny had sent her. She was wearing a long dress to the floor, and in her hands she was holding a microphone. "What's this?" Melanie managed to squeeze out. "This is my surprise for you, for us. I purposely pretended in the morning that I forgot about the anniversary as usual so that you wouldn't suspect anything. Everything should have gone differently. A white limousine would have come to work for you and brought you here, and on the way, you would have changed into a dress like a princess. I chose it myself. I think you'll like it. I wanted to make this day fabulous and unforgettable for us. You did this for me? Melanie hugged her husband and tried to hold back tears. This time she wanted to cry from relief and happiness. And then there was a wonderful show in honor of the wedding anniversary. It was done by the woman from the photo. Live music, a magician, a guest singer. And then the children that Jenny saw performed an acrobatic performance. Melanie had changed her mind so much in the few hours since Jenny's call, but she certainly hadn't expected this. Later, when it got dark, there were bright fireworks. Melanie looked at the multicolored flowers blooming in the black sky, and she was happy again. Dick gave her a fairy tale. It's a good thing she didn't have time to ruin everything.